Hello, everyone, and welcome to Claris Community Live. I'm Rosemary Teege, Community Manager at Claris. And with me today are Martha Zink, helping with production, also from the Claris Community team, and Yichen Yang from our product management team, and Louis de la Parra from the engineering team. And they're going to do a slower, deeper dive to help you get started using Claris MCP. And as we get started, and as the panelists all do a quick round of introductions, please answer our poll questions by clicking on the three little squares in the lower right and opening the Slido app to just let us know where you are with MCP right now and your use of AI with FileMaker. And so with that, Yichen, do you just want to introduce yourself a little bit? And then Louis.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name is Yichen. I'm a product manager at Claris.
Hey everybody, my name is Lou de la Parra. I'm an engineering lead at Claris. Happy to be here.
All right. And just a quick read of the poll. We have the first question: what best describes your experience with AI features in Claris FileMaker? 17% use them regularly in their FileMaker workflow. 44% have experimented with AI features but have not deployed them yet. And about the same, 41% haven't used the AI features at all. And as far as MCP familiarity, 4% have implemented MCP in projects. 50%, a little more than 50%, have heard about MCP but haven't used it yet. And 43% MCP is completely new. And then when do you plan to install FileMaker Server 2025 in production? 75% are already running in production. So I think we're getting better on FileMaker adoption. And so Yichen, why don't you start and just share a little bit about, again, what MCP is and where it fits in the broader AI landscape.
Yeah, for sure. Let me firstly start sharing my screen. Second, please. I'm just looking for my keynote. Hold on 1 second. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what Claris MCP is, as well as the overall architecture. But before I dive in, I'd like to clarify a few things about Claris MCP. Claris MCP is an MCP server for FileMaker, and it works for FileMaker applications hosted on FileMaker server. It's a remote service hosted by Claris, and it can connect to AI clients such as Claude Desktop, Cursor, Fast Agent, and potentially others. It does not support ChatGPT just yet, but we are currently working on OAuth support, so stay tuned for that. And what this is not is that it's not an on-prem or local version of MCP server, although that's something we are also actively exploring. And currently, it does not support FileMaker Cloud. So before we get into details, I'd like to take a step back and look at a general AI system architecture that involves MCP servers. On the top, you see a human interacts with an AI application, which could be a chat interface or an agent using natural language. This AI application sends a prompt to LLM host on a model server. The LLM processes that input and returns the model input. And if external data or actions are required, the AI application calls an MCP server. The MCP server, in this case, acting as the universal plug, connects to third-party systems. It could be Dropbox, GitHub, or Zoom, or many other systems. And those systems return structured results like API responses. And then the AI application combines all of those outputs and tool results and responds back to the user in natural language. So the AI application is really the orchestrator. The LLM provides that reasoning, and MCP provides the structured access to those external systems. Without an AI application, the LLM and MCP are just capabilities. So AI application is really what turns them into an experience.
So there are a couple of questions from people who joined late. Thanks, Louis, for answering that MCP stands for Model Context Protocol. And that, I think, again, as Yichen said, it's the orchestrator that lets the LLM interact.
Yeah, exactly. So MCP stands for Model Context Protocol. It's a standard that was introduced by the company Anthropic in late 2024. And it's been adopted pretty widely across the industry for building connectors between AI applications like ChatGPT or Claude and those third-party systems.
Yeah, and I guess there's another question of, just to specify again, Claude Desktop is one AI application that you can use that works with both to talk to a model and can interact with MCP. So it's the desktop version of, if you go to anthropic.ai, it's the desktop version of the chat that's on their site.
Yeah. So how does FileMaker fit into this architecture? In this setup, FileMaker is that external system that provides the data and the business logic. That's the system of record. It's where the workflows live, where scripts get executed, and it's the database plus the business logic engine behind MCP. And Claris MCP is that specific MCP server that bridges your FileMaker solution with your AI application. And of course, you could also connect other third-party systems through their own MCP servers, but the human always interacts with the AI application. To get started, you configure your MCP server. Actually, I'll show that in a bit through AI Workspace, which isn't shown on this diagram, but Louis will walk you through that shortly. So for what we're showing you today, we're using Claude by Anthropic. Claude is the AI application powered by Anthropic's model servers and LLMs. Claris MCP, again, is the MCP server that exposes FileMaker as structured tools, and FileMaker executes those tool calls and returns those results. Claude then integrates those results into the conversation and responds back to the human. So in this type of setup, FileMaker is not the AI client. It's not the AI model server. It remains that system of record and the execution engine.
Yeah, I think, there's been a request to just kind of walk through kind of a normal, an interaction again. So I think I'm going to talk through this, Yichen, and if you can bring your pointer on the slide. Oh, yeah. That helps. Yeah. So I'm a human and I am trying to solve a business problem, or I have questions about business, and I am super comfortable interacting with an AI application like Claude. I do a lot of my work there. So I'm talking to Claude all day to do whatever it is I need to do in my job. And many of those interactions are probably just going to the Anthropic model, the LLM. But every now and then I might ask a question or have a conversation that's like, hey, help me figure out what clients do I need to call today. And the AI model doesn't know that, but FileMaker knows that. And the AI application knows that it can talk to Claris MCP to get information out of the FileMaker database and then present it back to me in the AI application rather than me as an end user opening FileMaker. That one simple use case. And there's also a question of why did we choose to use Claude as the supported AI application?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so Claude being a product from Anthropic, it is the first AI client that really supported MCP, and the MCP ecosystem has been very strong, as well as the support. So there's been a lot of new features being built along the way, starting 2024 to support that protocol. Anything you want to add, Louis or Rosemary?
I would add there that we're showing Claude Desktop specifically today, but the MCP service that we're offering can be used with many different clients. When we get to the UI portion, I'll actually call out the different configurations you can use based on which client you'd like to connect to. So you're not limited to just Claude.
Yep. And Matt just called out, and I'm going to call this out too, is that the latest version of Claude Desktop seems to give an error. Matt found it, Louis and I found it when we were testing. So our original plan for today was Louis was going to talk me through getting everything configured. But because of that error with the latest and greatest Claude Desktop, we could not do that. So actually, Louis is going to be walking through the demo in a few minutes.
And in terms of the slide size, is it displaying for everyone? Because I do see some comments in the chat about slides being very small.
Yep, it's better now.
Okay, awesome. All right. So Louis will walk through, let me see. Yeah, so I'm going to just walk through some of the requirements. Louis will walk through them in more detail. But firstly, in terms of the license requirements, the allowed licenses are user, site, and enterprise licenses. It's currently not available for trial license or SBA or other ones.
Yeah, I would also add also not available for FileMaker developer subscription or an individual finished goods just FileMaker Pro license.
And our servers are currently based in the US region. Users abroad can still access it, but they may experience slower load times. We're working on kind of refining the user experience before expanding into other regions. So in terms of the system requirements that need to be met in order to use Claris MCP, all of this information is available in the Getting Started page in our help documentation, and the link is at the bottom of the screen.
And I also just put it in chat.
Yeah, thank you, Rosemary. So there's kind of two categories of system requirements. One is for Claris Studio. That's kind of how we're doing account management, authentication. And then the second piece is for FileMaker. So in terms of Claris Studio, you must have a Claris ID that is valid. Your account must also have the manager role in Studio. And for FileMaker, your file must be hosted on FileMaker server version 22.0.2 or later. And you must enable OData and Data API on your server. Your account must have full access, FM REST, and FM OData extended privileges. I'll just dive in a little bit into detail here. So in terms of the Claris Studio Manager account access, if you currently have a valid license, like site license, user license, enterprise license, but you do not have Studio, you need to set up your Studio through your Claris customer console. So I've attached the link there. And if your account is currently, this actually means that if your account is currently a member and not a manager, you need to ask the manager user in your organization to promote your account. And there's a link there for how to do that. And if you want to view who your team members are in Studio, you can visit Studio at the link pasted there. In terms of FileMaker, you need to enable OData and Data API, so you can see that on the admin console. And with the user privilege settings, your account must have both FMREST and FM OData extended privileges enabled. And if you happen to be on 22.0.2, you need to also disable value list access. So this is due to a system limitation that is addressed in the latter versions. And for field access, your account needs also access to all tables and fields that you intend to make available to the MCP client. All right. Let me just look through the questions.
Yeah. And I think, yes, so there's one question about SBA licenses are excluded. And yes, SBA licenses are excluded because Claris MCP relies on Claris Studio. And since Claris Studio is also not yet available to SBA, that's why that block is in place. And I know our licensing teams are working on that. And the next account is, can the account have read-only access to the data? I think that goes into what we're going to talk about next.
Mhm. Yeah, I'll stop the screen sharing and pass it over to Louis.
Awesome. Thank you, Yichen. Appreciate the overview. Let me do the same and share my screen. Rosemary, anytime you have questions or you get some from the community, let's stop and talk about it. To segue from what Yichen was talking about, I'm going to start off in FileMaker, right? Looking at a file. In this particular case, this file is called Peakworks. It's a demo file that we have to showcase some of the functionality with MCP. You might have seen Robert use it in a few demos as well. I'm going to start here by first looking at the security that Yichen mentioned. We'll go into a little bit of detail there, see if there's any questions, and then we'll move into the table structure, and then finally we'll get to jump into the UI and create an MCP connection together. So first and foremost, I'm going to go over to the Manage Security dialog in FileMaker. And very similar to how you would create an account for either OData or the Data API, we're going to create a specific account for this MCP connection with a new privilege set that we're going to define together. And so in this particular case, I've gone ahead and done it, but I'll walk you through it real quick. I have this last account here, which is the MCP account, and it has the privilege set of Claris MCP. And so if I were to go in and update this account, we'll see some of the settings that Yichen showed earlier. First and foremost, as we mentioned, the account needs to have access via the FileMaker Data API, FMREST, and that is used for container access as well as listing scripts. The other access or extended privilege set that it needs is access via OData, and we're going to use OData in order to both create the tools and then allow the tools to be executed via the OData API. No other extended privilege sets are required other than FMREST and FMOData. And again, the account is specific to MCP in this case. Digging in a little bit deeper, if we look at the data access and design sections, you'll see that I currently have record access set to create, edit, and delete in all tables, layouts as all modifiable, valueless as all modifiable. That's because I'm on the latest version of FileMaker Server. Again, as Yichen mentioned, if you're using FileMaker Server 22.0.2, go ahead and take the valueless and make it no access. The service itself, the MCP service, doesn't actually use valueless, so you're not losing anything there. It just prevents a known bug in FileMaker from preventing your connection from completing. So valueless, if you're on 22.0.2, turn it to all no access. If you're on a later version of server, no need to change it. The other updates I'm going to do here is scripts. I'm going to make them all executable. There's no script modifications at all with MCP at the moment. What we will do is list scripts when creating the MCP connection and then execute the scripts if we decide to include that tool inside MCP. So I'll set scripts to all executable only. And then last but not least, for the records, in this case, I will keep create, edit, and delete in all tables as is, because this is a demo file and I want to be able to show you all of the things that MCP can do. Per the security practices that we all know and love, you can come in here and set custom privileges. And so much like you've known for, again, the Data API or OData, you can choose to have a table be viewable, editable, create, and then even go to all field access and make it limited. And that allows you to control which fields are going to be exposed to MCP.
And there is a question, can you make the data views read-only for MCP, or does it have to have, does the privilege set for MCP have to have write access as well?
It does not have to have write access. You can make it read-only, and only read-only to the fields and tables that you specifically want to be able to read from. That security that's in FileMaker is what's going to secure the connection to MCP. Later on, one of the things you can do is also disable tools that you don't want. So if you want a mixture of FileMaker security and then specific tool set, you can also disable at the tool level. So two different areas where you can adjust the read and write access.
Okay, and last question. Why do layouts need to be modifiable? Or does MCP modify layouts?
Excellent question. I may have misspoke. Layouts does not need to be modifiable. They need to be at least viewable. And that is only if you want to work with containers. One of the things that we found is the data API still does a really good job of providing container access via a URL. And so we'll use that layout in order to allow the AI client, or the LLM in this case, to be able to update or upload files. So you only need the view access to a layout if you want to use the container tools as well. If not, you don't need any access at all. And there's no modification of the layouts at all. Everybody feel comfortable with the security portion?
Yep, no more questions.
Great. Okay, let's move on to a little bit of the database section. I really quickly want to call out something that I've heard people ask about in the community, and so just want to call it out here. In order for the UI of AI Workspace to see the tables and allow you to select them, you want to make sure that the tables are available on your layout with the name that matches the base table. The UI will filter the tables available to what is in the relationship graph and matches the base table. As an example here, the services with a trailing underscore, this table occurrence will not be seen because it doesn't match the base table name. The services that matches correctly without the underscore will be seen in the UI. Now, if you want to get more advanced, there is an API layer where you can just specify any table occurrence you want. But to keep things simple today, we're going to just look at the UI and know that for the table to show up in the UI, it needs to be on the relationship graph matching the base table name.
And is that case sensitive as well?
It is not case sensitive.
Okay.
Awesome. Okay. So with that, let's head on over to the UI and walk through creating of a connection.
I just want to call out one other question that was asked in chat, and that is, what ports do you need to have open on your firewall to your FileMaker server? And that was answered to just port 443, which is so that Data API and OData API can access. And I will add that would be the same access you would use if you're using instant web publishing or custom web publishing. There's no additional ports needed.
Correct. Yes.
All
I
right.
thought I saw a question come through of how do you install the MCP server? This version that we're showing you today runs in Claris's cloud. And so there's nothing you need to install in order to use it. You're using our hosted version of the service.
Oh, here's one more good question before you go to the next thing.
Let's go for it.
Denny asks, I have a really old FileMaker app that was created with one table per file. So it's a multi-file app. So you need to do that security configuration in every file and then the additional MCP configuration in every file.
You do need to do the security configuration in each file that you'd like to access, much like the data API or OData. When we get to the point of actually creating the connection, I'll call this out, but you can have multiple connections per one context. So if you do have a multi-file system and you want to keep it all within one MCP context, you can do so just by adding multiple connections. And when we get there, I'll call that out.
All right, I think we're good.
Awesome. So what you see on screen here is the AI Workspace UI. And the first thing I want to call out, and Yichen called it out in her slides as well, is the help documentation. And so if I go to the bottom left corner here where you see my name, and click on the drop down, you'll see that there's a documentation link. If at any time you get confused over how the UI works, or you have a question that you feel like might be answered in the help, head to the bottom left corner, select the documentation option, and it'll take you right to the Claris help. So we've done as much as possible, tried to put the help foremost into the UI by putting it next to the account there. The other thing I would call out, and it's similar to what we saw earlier, is troubleshooting and common issues, as well as best practices. These are things that, as we use MCP, you want to keep in mind, right? Like what to do when a connection times out, security best practices, performance optimization, and then again, some troubleshooting. And so if you need a little bit more help, head to the Claris help section, which is available in the documentation section of the UI. That being said, let's create a connection and create a context in order to connect to Claude Desktop. And so you'll see here that I'm starting with nothing. I don't have any connections or context available. I'm going to click the Getting Started in the middle here, and it's going to ask me for two things. One, the context name, and the other, a description of the context. The context name is just for me. It's so that later on I can remember what this context does. And so I'll give it a name of PeakWorks, since that's the database that I use. And I'll say this is a database containing jobs and technicians. Right, just for me, for later on, I'll know what this is. So I'll choose create, and it's going to create a context for me. On the left-hand side, you can now see that context. Additionally, you can create more than one. And one of the reasons why that's important to do or good to do is that you may have different FileMaker files, like we were talking about earlier, or different permissions that you might want to manage. Maybe someone on your team only does support, and so they only need the context for support, but someone else is more of a technician and they need a different set of MCP tools. And so we allow you to create as many as you want, and you can have as many connections within a context as you'd like. And so I now have my first context here. I'll click the Add Connection in the middle, and it's going to ask me for a few pieces of information. It's going to ask me a connection name, the domain for my FileMaker server, and the username and password. So again, the context is for me. I'll again call this PeakWorks because I'm not very inventive. And for the domain, I'm going to put in my FileMaker server, hopefully typing it correctly. And then the username, I'll use the MCP account that we saw earlier. Oh, there we go. Once that's done, I'll choose next, and it's going to find all the databases, all the files that's on my FileMaker server, and allow me to select the one that I'd like. As I mentioned earlier, you may have a multi-file system, and in this case, you would just create a connection with each file, and that will culminate in one MCP context that has all of the tools for all of the files. So if you wanted to combine a multi-file system together into one MCP, this is how you would do it.
Yeah, there is a question I think related to that is, could you use if like the standard FileMaker practice of using an interface file and just connect to that, or does MCP need to connect actually to the file that hosts the table you're accessing?
You can use an interface file, much like OData. How well that works for you is really going to depend upon your interface file. One of the things I've found folks use is actually use an interface file with just scripts, and then using the scripts in order to access the additional information. There, though, you need to make sure that the accounts that are used have the ability to both execute the script and then have the ability to create the information in whatever other database you're connecting to. So it is possible to do an interface file. There's just some more setup you need to do. Awesome. With that, I'm going to go ahead and create a connection. I've selected PeakWorks, which is the database that we saw earlier, and I'll choose next here. It's going to go through and it's going to list all my tables. And again, those are the tables that match the base table name and are present on the relationship graph. And so in this case, I want to have a connection to my jobs table. and my technicians table. Those are the two things that, in the context of this demo, that I'd like to be able to create tools for. For each table, there's multiple tools that are created. We'll see those tools in a minute. For each script, there's one tool to execute that script that gets created. We'll walk through that together in a little bit. Since we know that there can be many database files and tables available, we provide via the UI a way to search. And so if for whatever reason I wanted to quickly find my services table, let's select that one as well. I can choose I can input service and then find that table. With that, I'll choose next. And it's then going to ask me, well, which script would I like to connect to? And in this case, I want to select the assign job script. That's going to be the script that we'll use to demo. Same paradigm. If you have a lot of scripts, which I know a lot of folks do, you can search for it easily via the UI. Since I have just the assign jobs, I'll select that one and then choose create connection. And so from here, what MCP is going to do, or the MCP service we have is going to do, is it's going to look at the tables and scripts that are selected and create tools that are unique to those tables and scripts. And that's part of the power of MCP. One of the things that MCP gives you, or gives your LLM, is the definition of the tools contain the input schema and the instructions on how to use it. The way that I like to describe this to folks is it's just like having a REST API, but not only do you have the REST API, you have the instructions for how to use that REST API bundled together. And so that makes the LLM way more accurate in choosing the right tool and executing on that tool. I'll pause there for any questions or comments.
So there's a question about how do you make this multi-user? So how do you deploy MCP to multiple users at a client?
Sure, we're actually going to get into that in a little bit. Part of the reason we use Studio here is it gives us the ability to generate what we'll call a developer token or a static token. And then you distribute that token with the configuration, and that's how you'd allow multiple users to use it. Remember, though, when you do that, everything is tied back to the permissions of the account we set up. But that's why we started there. So whatever permissions that account has, anyone that you share this configuration with will have those same permissions.
Right. So that means, just to be super clear, that like if you're doing any user logging in your database, because if you have record creation or the ability to run scripts enabled, the user is going to show up as whatever that Claris MCP user is, and not as John Smith.
That's exactly right. Yeah. Okay, so from here, I'd like to show you how to create the configuration, and then if we have time, we'll circle back and kind of update the tools. Because again, updating of the tools and adding of the information, that's where you as a developer is going to provide significant value to the LLM. But let's do the configuration first. Let's get it set up, and then we'll circle back. And so at the moment, I've created a context. That context has a connection, right, which is called peakwork. And then I have multiple tools that were created based on the tables and scripts that I selected. The next step that I want to do here is set up a configuration with Claude Desktop. And I'm going to do that by first moving this context from the editing stage to the testing stage. If you take a look up in the middle portion of the UI, you'll see the Peakworks connection and it says editing. That means that I'm currently in development mode, if you will. I can make changes to my tools, I can update them, but I can't yet deploy it. So I don't yet have that static token that I talked about earlier. To do that, I'm going to move my context into the testing stage. This very closely mirrors a modern SDLC approach, where you start out in editing or development, you then move into testing or evaluation, and then finally move to deployment when you have everything working the way you'd like. And so in this case, for the purposes of the demo, I'm going to go from editing to testing. And once I do that, you'll notice that the little pill now says testing in orange, and my configuration option here is now available to select. That means I now have the information needed in order to configure Claude Code. So when I select this configuration, it's going to give me a variety of options. That is because, as we mentioned earlier, we don't just support Claude Desktop. We support many, many, many MCP clients. Some MCP clients take a different type of configuration. For our purposes today, we're going to use the server file and the proxy configuration, which is command-based. That's specific to Claude Desktop. Other clients will take other configurations. We've taken the most popular and made them instantly available to you. I'm going to copy this so we have it, and then we'll head all over into Claude Desktop, and I'll show you how to set that up. Before I move from here, does anyone have any questions on the configuration or what that looks like?
No, I think there's just a broader question of, and just to clarify, that the configuration you're doing right now in the AI workspace is something that you as the developer does once. This is not something any end user is going to see, correct?
That's correct. Yes. This entire UI is only meant for the team manager, in this case, the developer. The end user never has to touch any of this.
All right.
Awesome. All right, let's switch on over to Claude Desktop.
Oh, there is a question.
Go.
Can you go back to your configuration? How do you know which configuration to choose?
Another excellent question. Really reading the documentation for the client you're using is going to indicate which one you should use. For Claude Desktop, that is a file-based system, and I'm going to show you that file later on. If you're using something like the Model Context Protocol Inspector, which is a developer tool provided by Anthropic, you would just use the URL and the static token. And so really, the answer to that is, how do you know which configuration to use? Take a look at the documentation for the client you're using. In this case, it's Claude Desktop. When we get over to Claude Desktop, I'm going to call out the two pieces of information that are critical so that you can identify them for the future. Sound good?
Yep.
All right, let's do it. Okay, so I've got it copied. I've got the configuration in my pasteboard. And you'll see here I've got Claude Desktop opened up. And what I will do is go to Claude and then Settings. And then I'll head down to this developer area on the left-hand side. That's going to expose an edit config option. When I click edit config, you'll see a file that looks something like this, right? Which is a JSON-based file. And I'm going to paste in the configuration we created. Just to really quickly go over this, what this file is telling Claude is that I have MCP servers, and I can have multiple. The first server that I have is called Claris Proxy. And then the critical pieces of information is the URL that I'm going to connect to. And in this case, I'm going to do an SSE connection. And then the static token that is used to connect to that connection or to secure that connection. We had a question earlier about like, how do I do multi-user? That static token, which is a feature of Studio, is what allows us to distribute this to many people, keep it secure, and then allow them to connect. Now, this token is a secret. You want to treat it like a secret. And so you want to be sure never to commit it to GitHub, never to post it online, give it to your end users when they need it, but otherwise secure it like you would secure a password.
All right. And I'll just call out, you're exposing it to a recording and you are going to go blow up this context as soon as the demo is over.
That's accurate. I have many of these for this exact purpose. Yeah. So I'm going to save this. And then I'll head back into Claude and give it a restart. When Claude restarts, it's going to read that configuration, and if all goes well, we'll have the connection. And I can check on this by going to Claude and Settings again, and going back to that developer area, and we'll see that we have the Claris proxy, which is the same name we had from the configuration, and it shows as running. This tells me it's connected. The next step here is to do something fun and ask Claude a question. And so
Actually, before you do that, I just want to call something out that anyone who is concerned about AI costs needs to know. And that is, you can use an MCP server with any tier of Claude licensing. So you can test this out using the free Anthropic Claude subscription. And then if you need more performance or want to be able to do more, you can then upgrade your subscription later.
That's exactly right. And I'd go even further there and say you can use whichever model you'd like. If you happen to have a local model and using something like Olama, it's totally fine to use that model here. You're not locked into any particular model. I like to think of it as like a BYOM, bring your own model plan. And so, yes, from a cost perspective or from a hosting perspective, whichever model best suits your use case, go ahead and use. MCP is just the connection from FileMaker to your model, right? We think of the script steps and the AI features that are in FileMaker that brought AI into FileMaker. MCP is bringing FileMaker into your AI, so it's going the other direction. Okay, that being said, I'll create a new chat here, and I'm going to go ahead and ask it a question. I'll say, how many jobs do I have ready today? And what it's going to do is it's going to evaluate my question. It's going to take a look at the tools that I have available. And because this is the first time that I'm asking the LLM or Claude in this case, to execute a tool, it's going to ask me. And that's true of all the tools that are available. That gives you an additional layer of security so that the LLM isn't doing something that doesn't explicitly have your permission. In this case, I can choose just allow once, or for the sake of the demo, I'll say always allow. And what that's going to do is execute the tool. And in this case, it says, oh, well, I tried to search and I didn't get much. And so the LLM intelligently knows, well, let me do a list. Let me see what's available with the list. And I'll always allow that as well. It's going to execute the tool again. It shows that there's no jobs in ready. So it's going to take a look and say, oh, well, you don't have anything ready, but there's a lot of things that are complete or unassigned or in progress. And so I'll say, show me the in progress jobs. So it looks, it says, okay, I have 80 jobs currently in progress. Here's a summary breakdown with all the jobs that I have in progress. So before I move forward, any questions? No? Okay, let's go a little bit further. Let's try something out. Let's just test it.
Oh, there is actually a question.
Oh, let's go for it.
And what if you had 2,000 records that were in progress? Like, what's the limit to what would be returned?
So each tool does have a limit. It's dependent upon the tool that you're talking about. So the search tool is limited by default to 100, the list as well. The hard limit is 10,000, which is the OData limit before you have to get into pagination. That is what the tools can support, but I really clearly want to call out that that may not be the best for your model. Trying to put all of that information into the model may overwhelm the model and just cost more money. And so, as much as possible, you want to try to get your model to only select the information that it explicitly needs. And I will show you ways to do that when we go back into the UI.
All right. And one other question is, would this work, this configuration, Claude talking to MCP work if your app is in German and your users speak German?
It for sure would. And so that is really going to depend upon the model that you have, but it would work. One of the things that I didn't call out when we were creating the tools, but one of the things that we do under the hood to ensure that MCP is compatible with as many languages as possible is map the fields. And so, as an example, you may have a field with a non-ASCII character. Most MCP clients can't handle that non-ASCII character. And so the MCP service that we've developed will map that field name into something that it can. And so that is one of the ways we look to ensure that it's as universally executable as possible. The other very cool thing I'd call out is with the addition of the latest OData syntax, we have the field IDs. When those are available, we will use those instead. And so when that occurs, there's no need to even know the field name at all. Let me do one more thing just to kind of show you this. I'll say get my jobs table definition. And so hopefully with the LLM interprets that question, it should get the jobs definition via a tool that I have, and it'll actually show you what that table looks like. And that very, very clearly shows, as I was saying earlier, that MCP is like having the REST API and the documentation for the REST API all rolled together for the LLM. So not only does it understand the tools that it has, it understands the specific information about the database that you've connected it to. And so that's how it knows that my jobs table definition has a customer name. It's a string. It's read only in this case and indexed, so on and so forth. Cool.
And just quickly, there's a question of, can you get Claude to generate a graph, or your client?
Yes, let's give it a try. So can you create a graph for me using the in progress jobs? Try ranking it by importance. And so there, Claude is executing the tool in order to grab the information. It's also creating some JavaScript, HTML, and CSS for me. In this case, it's creating JavaScript at the moment. And when it's finished, it might take a little bit, it'll give you the UI. One really great thing here that I find amazingly cool is you can take that HTML and put it directly in a web viewer, right? And so I think that that's kind of a cool use of both FileMaker and in this case, Claude Desktop together, right? You can very quickly with some of your end users go through and decide if that graph is what they need. If it is, take that HTML and put it in a web viewer. So I'll let this run for a minute. It's going to take a little bit because we did ask it for a lot of info. While it's running, let's go back to the UI. We'll talk about some stuff, and hopefully by the time we come back, it'll be done.
Sounds good.
Awesome. I'll make it a little bit bigger while we wait. Okay. So let's head back to the UI. I have just a few things I'd like to go over with you. And then we'll have some more fun. So far, I've created a configuration using my FileMaker table. I've moved that configuration into the testing phase, and that gave me the configuration in order to test with Claude. And I really quickly want to call out the testing phase as we've been very intentional in adding it. One of the things that is becoming very prevalent within the AI ecosystem is the idea of an evaluation, or the idea of testing the models that you have with the tools to make sure that they act in the way that they should. So the testing phase in this case allows you to do that. It allows you to deploy the configuration to Claude Desktop, test it out, make sure it's going to work the way that you want it to. And then when you're ready, you can move it from testing to deployment. When that happens, all of the tools and the configuration that you have thus far are frozen. And what that allows is that ensures that when you deploy this to your end users, tools don't change and the LLM behaves exactly as you would expect it to. You can at any time do what we call a branch. I'm just going to deploy this real quick so we can see what that looks like. And now that it's deployed, if you'll notice, I can't change any of the tools. I can look at them, but nothing can change. If I wanted to go back and then update that, I can move it back into editing. And you'll see that now I have this branch and I'm back in the edited branch. The reason why we do that is so that, again, your end users can continue to use the deployed context with no changes, but you as a developer are able to make adjustments. And then when you're ready, go back in and deploy the context as well. And so not only did we add an SDLC in this case, but we also added the concept of branching. And if you've ever used a Git-based workflow before, you'll know that term branching. It allows you to make changes without disturbing the original trunk.
All right.
Any questions? Go ahead.
I'm going to interrupt with it. We have about 10 minutes left in the scheduled time but Louis has kindly agreed to stick around longer so we can run long. So if you have to leave, feel free to leave. But we are recording, so we will share the recording to Claris community, Claris YouTube channel later today, and then also we'll send you email next week with a link to the recording. And also before you leave, please do answer our closing questions. It helps us know if we got the pace and the timing right and what you're thinking about what you might do with Claris MCP. And there are a few questions just about configuration. So would you designate fields? So like you can with the within FileMaker, if you're using the execute SQL with natural language script step, you can add notes and the LLM in square brackets to control what fields are used. So would you do that when you're configuring MCP, or would you control what fields have access based on the security you set up for the MCP user?
The most secure way to do it would be to use the managed security dialog and the data design and access pane to remove the fields that you don't want the LLM to interact with. That's the most secure way. But you can absolutely update the tool definition to either remove a field that you don't want it to access or add a description to tell the LLM to only use it in certain use cases. One of the things that we are currently testing and shall be out very soon is we will actually, if you have the LLM tagged comments in your database, we will populate those into your MCP tools automatically. And so we've done as much as possible to try to keep the work that you've done in FileMaker beneficial to MCP as well. And it's actually, that's a great segue, Rosemary. If you don't have any other questions there, I'll actually show that now.
I was just going to say, why don't you show that now, and then we'll go on to the next question.
Awesome. And so just to recap on where we are, I've got the same context we had earlier set up in a branch. And now because it's branch and I'm back in the editing portion, I can edit the details of my tools. And so to answer the question that we just had, I'll click the edit tools option here, and I can change the tool name, the description, I can enable or disable it, or I can update the input schema. And actually this first property here, the FMID with the number, that is a good example of what I was talking about earlier. If you have fields that have a character that can't be used by an AI client, we will automatically map it to the ID as well. We do that for both the tool and then in the table definition. What that allows the LLM to do is if it doesn't know the fields, it'll look at the definition first and then execute the tool. And so that's what you see here. Additionally, I can go through and update or delete any of the fields that I want. For whatever reason, let's say I don't want the LLM to interact with company here. I can choose delete, and now that field is removed from the tool. The other thing that I can do is add a description to the field. And again, if you have those LLM tags, very, very soon we'll populate those for you automatically. But I can add a description to this to say the email of the customer who requested the job. And again, that allows the LLM, when it looks at this field, to understand, hey, this particular field is used in this particular context. It makes the LLM way more accurately execute the tools and way more able to understand what it's working with. And so this is where you as a developer, your knowledge and the understanding of the database that you built really pays off. That is really what powers MCP, is taking the knowledge of your database and how the tables and fields interact, how the users use your database, and adding that to the AI client so that it has that same knowledge. The other thing I can do here is make the field required. So I could say anytime this tool executes, we have the email description and the email must be in the tool. I'll pause there for any questions or comments. Okay. For the folks that love JSON, much like I love JSON, you can do this via UI or you can do this via JSON. The JSON that we support is a JSON schema It's a very widely used schema that's out there. And so you can do that here as well. And so you have either option. You can use UI or you can use JSON. We accept both. And so really quickly, I want to go through just a few more things. When we get into scripts, let me get over to scripts, you'll notice here that the script itself takes a script parameter of string. And that's because, as we know, a script can accept any string-based parameter, and based on that, we'll be able to execute based on the parameters you give it. And so that's a really powerful option that we have in FileMaker, right? Scripts can do almost anything the developer can think of. And so the input for that script tends to be abstract. And so one of the things that is really useful for us to do here is to be able to update that script with the input parameters that the script expects. In this case, I don't want it to be a script parameter of string. I want it to accept a technician ID. And I'm going to make that required and say the ID of the technician who will be assigned the job. Right? And then I'll go in and add another property. My script also takes a job ID. So let me do that. And I will add a description of the job for which the technician can be assigned. And then I'll make that required as well. When I save this, I've now updated the tool definition, and the LLM will know to only call this tool, which executes a script, with a technician ID and a job ID to ensure that the script runs as we would expect. And so again, adding or updating those tool definitions is what allows your LLM to really deeply understand the database that it's interacting with. Any questions or comments there?
So yeah, there's been some discussion in chat about do descriptions that you put as a developer in managed database in FileMaker go into the descriptions of your schema and tools in Claris MCP?
At the moment, I would say let's not add the tag. There is a bug with one of the latest versions of server. But in the future, yes. If you tag a field or a table comment with the LLM tag, we will populate those into the description of the tools. But again, hold off yet. There is a known issue that we're resolving. And so for now, I'd say enter it just in the UI. In the future, that will automatically be populated.
Okay, and there's another question. So for the FileMaker ID _ X that shows up somewhere here, how do I know what field that applies to?
So in this particular case, from here, you don't, right? However, one of the things that the LLM is really good at is using the other tools to get this property. And so here, one of the things you can do is either one, look at the table definition from Claude Desktop, and then you'll know what that is, or two, go through and just add a name that you'd like, right? You don't it doesn't have to be FMID and a number. You can change this to anything that you'd like, as long as, again, it doesn't have a non-ASCII character or character that some LLMs can't support.
And actually, around those characters, is there a list anywhere of characters that are allowed or not allowed in names?
The most succinct way I'd put it is non-ASCII characters are not widely supported. We don't have a full list because it really is based on the client, right? Some clients will support some characters, other clients will support others. The common ground that we found is it has to be an ASCII-based character. And again, that's where we will automatically resolve them for you, either using the ID or by updating the field name to match what you know, if we can do that. Right.
One more question. if you want the LLM to run a script, do you have to call it specifically? So do you have to say to your AI client, run the tool script name?
No,
Um,
no. One of the great things that LLM are really, really good at is interpretation. And so if you notice, if we head back over to Claude real quick, oh, we have our dashboard. Look at that. Um, when I first made the question, I said, how many jobs do I have ready today? I didn't say it's a table in FileMaker. I didn't give it any specific prompting in that regard. The LM understood that I wanted the jobs. It sees that I have the job definition, and so it will execute that tool. That inference is, again, what LMs are really good at. And so the more definition you add to your MCP context, the better the LLM will be in interpreting what you mean. So you don't have to say, like, execute this script. You can just say, assign this job to that technician. And because we've given the information via the MCP tool, the LLM will know to call the execute script tool with the required parameters. It's one of the great things about LLMs.
and someone asked if they could see the finished chart.
Yep.
And here we are. And there was a question about the chart is when you were having Claude chew on that chart, did it stream all the data from FileMaker over to the LLM to be able to build that chart?
It did. In fact, if we head back on over to the code, you'll see that at the very top, it's got the jobs and it pulled the ID, the customer, the company, and so forth. So it is taking the information and it is putting it into the LLM. And again, as we saw earlier, you want to try to be as efficient as possible with that. We certainly wanted to keep it simple today, so we didn't show you some of these, but we offer both a search tool and an aggregation tool to allow you to limit how much information gets passed into the model. Again, you can bring whatever model you want. And so if you're worried about your information going to another provider, you can use your own model via either the AI model server that we have or via your own locally hosted model. Did I get the intent of that question correct? Was it mainly
Yeah.
around the information? Awesome.
Yep. And so for this, can you track usage, token usage as you can within FileMaker?
That is going to be dependent on the client that you have. I don't believe, and I could be wrong, but I don't believe Claude Desktop allows you to do that, but other clients do as well, or other clients do. Um, one of the things that, again, that testing phase is really important on is to be able to run evaluations, and most evaluations will give you, per the question that you ask, what the token consumption is, both input and output consumption.
And there's a question, and I think maybe Louis and Yichen, you both may want to talk about this. And what are the implications of using applications that have personal information in them when you're using Claris MCP, talking to an AI client?
So that is really going to be dependent upon the model that you're using and the vendor that you're using. I didn't show it today, but one of the things that Claude Desktop allows you to do when you start up a new account is to decide whether or not the information that you provide it will be used for future training. And so that is a feature that uh, Claude Desktop has. Other providers have different specifications, but it's important to know which model you're using, what the implications are. Claris is never saving any of the information that's passing through our servers. It's going directly from FileMaker through our system into your model, and it's never saved. So it's really just a question of the model that you're using. Is it appropriate for your use case? And really, you as the developers are the people that are best equipped to answer that.
So there's another question back to using MCP. Can you show an example of a complex find with multiple requests and omits that might be hard for a FileMaker user to construct, but that MCP might be able to interpret if you say, tell it what you're looking for?
Sure, I can certainly try. Let me share my screen. We'll give it a go. The right screen here. Nope, it's only showing Claude, but I think that's okay. Close out my wonderful dashboard. Let me see what I might want to ask here. Give me the jobs that are not in progress and are the most requested. So most popular jobs that are not in progress. I would expect this to use the search. And one of the great things here is if the search does fail for whatever reason, the LM is going to figure out another way forward. Right? And so in this case, it first searched the job records, got some information back, and now it's doing another search in order to retrieve the non-in-progress jobs. So that's just what on the spot came to my head, but that is a great example of not only using one search, which may have an omit or a find, but actually doing multiple. Right? And that is where the power of the AI models really come into play. Right? They're able to do that at a much higher level.
And that is the last question I saw. I don't know if anyone had questions that we missed as we were going through, but yeah. So can you repeat what is required to use Claris MCP? Yichen, do you have that slide handy?
Yeah, I believe the slide's probably the best way.
Yeah. Oh, you're muted, Yichen.
Okay, sorry. I was saying that let me switch back to my slides. Give me just one moment.
Yeah, and while she's doing that, we have another question, and this came up a couple times. So if you set up your MCP context and then go back to your database and add more fields or more tables, or you decide you want to expose more to MCP, how do you go back and refresh the context?
So there is a way to refresh it via the API, and actually in the future we're going to make some of that automatic based on some of the functionality that's in OData. We're also working on a way to do it from the UI. And so today you'd have to create a new connection if you're using the UI, but very soon in the future there'll be a refresh option, which will go back based on the tools that you have and update them based on the changes you've made. So more to come is a good way of saying that.
Okay, Javier, I hope this answers your question about what is required. And just to summarize, you have to have a Claris IC ID that is an account manager role in Claris Studio. And that's where the license types come in of standard Claris user licensing, a site license, or an enterprise license. And then with FileMaker, you have to be hosted on FileMaker server 22.0.2 or later, and then have OData data API enabled and an account that has the FMREST and FMOData extended privileges. And again, our best practice recommendation for that is to set up a specific FileMaker user for Claris MCP. And with that, I'm going to make one last call for questions. Oh, the bug about value lists, is that fixed? And Louis, I think you called that out earlier. Yes, it is fixed in 22. So 22.0.2 and earlier, you need to say no access to value lists, and 22.0.3 or 0.4 server, the value list bug is fixed.
That's right.
Yes, and another question about licensing. Being a one-person shop, I only have the FileMaker developer subscription. I'm asking, are there plans to extend Studio and MCP to the FDS license? I know it's a very common request. I do not know where our plans are for extending those licensing options at this time. Oh, thank you, Matt, for that validation that you've managed to get it working while we worked through. So happy to hear that. I'm going to give you some applause for that. So thank you again, Louis and Yichen, for the extra time today. Thank you for everyone who stayed around. And I hope to see you in 2 weeks for our next Community Live. Watch the community and your email for the announcement for that session. We're still making final tweaks to what the topic for that will be. So we'll see you all in 2 weeks and in the Claris community before then.
Thank you, everyone.
Everyone, thank you very much.
Thanks.